Hey guys, Mike Plume here. Welcome to Stories from a Lonesome Stretch of Highway. Every once in a while, every now and again, when the moon's holding water, I'm going to pour a cup of coffee and tell some stories. Episode 7. The lonesome stretch of highway between that northern town and today. Back in February of 1993, I moved to Dallas, Texas to record my first album, Songs from a Northern Town. I'd been writing songs for that album pretty much since I wrote my very first song back in the fall of 1985. But the first song that managed to hang on and wind up on that first album was a song called Something or Someone to Hold. It was a song written on Boxing Day 1988 in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. That song managed to somehow hang on through the years and found a place on that first album. The next song I would have written for that record would have been a song called The Rebound. I started that in the summer of 1990, I believe, and probably by the summer of 92 it was completed. A couple other songs that were written for that album around that time would have been Has Anyone Seen Benny, which was in November of 91, A Million Miles Away, which was also in November of 91, and let me see what else, Crazy After All would have been written in the spring of 1991. Then in May 1992, I started writing the rest of the songs that would wind up on that first album. Songs like Ain't That the Truth, It's All Right, Eyes Like Road Maps, what else was on that record? Daisy's Dream, Kept on Dancing, songs like that. So those songs were all written from May of 1992 until probably November of 92. The last song I wrote for the record was written after I had driven from Edmonton all the way to Dallas, Texas. I deadheaded there. I think it took me 3 days to get from Edmonton to Dallas. And I picked up my guitar the next day, and the song El Dorado and the 1215 was waiting there for me. And so that was the last song written for that record. Started recording the album in April of 93, April 4th, I think it was. It was a Saturday morning. We went in the studio, set up, and started recording. Finished recording the album in end of May, around May 25th, something like that. And I remember, I wouldn't say I slid into a depression, but I certainly slid into a funk because I thought I would never record another album. I thought I would never record another song. I just thought that was the end of the line for me. I'd waited my whole life. I'd been so excited to record this album, and when it was over, I kind of went through the probably the various stages of grief. Then a couple of days later, on May 28th, 1993, which would have been my 25th birthday, I woke up, poured a cup of coffee, lit a cigarette, and wrote a song called Good Intentions. They say that good intentions pave the road to hell. I can't believe the complications I've made for myself. I can see my destination, but there's no end that I can tell. They say that good intentions pave the road straight to hell. Well, jump back, Kerouac, he ain't got nothing on me. I don't want to hear it. Free spirit is the only way to be. I mean, it's fine most of the time, but right now it's wearing thin. I've been everywhere, but I can't tell you where I am. I wrote that song on my birthday, and I didn't write anything else for almost another year. I slid into what they call writer's block. And that was probably, that was horrifying because I thought I would never write another song. I've since found out that I think, or at least I've convinced myself, or attempt to convince myself, that writer's block is nothing more than just a mental block. And if you start saying you have writer's block, then you're going to have it. So I I refuse to believe there's such a thing. I'm just either collecting information or I'm writing about the information I've collected. And if I'm not writing, it's because I'm collecting. That's all. Anyway, so Northern Town came out in November of 1993. And it was full steam ahead. I figured that record would come out and it would just rocket to the top of the charts, and I would be touring around in, with a fleet of tour buses and a fleet of semis and private jets and stuff. And instead, I ended up tooling around in a 1981 Dodge 15-passenger van that ran on propane. We called her Propane Elaine. It was a rude awakening. So that was November of '93. The next record came out. We started recording it. About a year went by before I wrote another song after the Northern Town album, and then I wrote a song called "Wandering Blues." Which was a little minute and a half long song that ended up being on the second record. An album called Jump Back Kerouac, taken from the line from my song Good Intentions. Jump back Kerouac, he ain't got nothing on me. So we started recording that album in August 1985. Eventually finished that, I think, in December of 85. The record came out on February 3rd, 1996. So it had been, 2.5 years between the first and second album, but at least I had 2 albums. I was very excited by that, and I was a writing fool by that point. I was writing pretty steady, and if I wasn't, I was collecting information, so I wasn't concerned about it. And I've kind of lived by that motto since then. You're either writing or you're collecting. Just keep moving forward. So that was February of 1996 when that record came out. A year later, February of 1997, the guys and I started pre-production on our third record, which was the album that you see right behind me, Song and Dance Man. We recorded that song in April of 1997. We recorded it in a little over a week, actually. I think we recorded all our tracks in 8 or 9 days, and then we hit the road for Toronto. And then Merrick, David, the producer, stayed behind and mixed the album for us, and that was that. Before we recorded that album, we had block booked a bunch of studio time at Beta Sound here in Edmonton, and we had paid for X amount of time, and after the album was done, we had a couple days left over, and I don't know whether we could get a refund or what it was, but for some reason I had the harebrained idea that we could record another album in one day to record, one day to mix. In fact, I already had the songs. Yeah, man, I got the songs. Let's do this. We can do it. I know we can do it. And so basically every fourth song I've written over the years is certainly, they're probably all cut from the same folk music cloth, and it's just how we approach the songs. But some songs really lend themselves well to just a nice finger-picked guitar pattern with a nice folky delivery. And I had those songs waiting, and that was the album that was Simplified. And so 1993 we put out Northern Town. 1996 we put out Jump Back Kerouac. In 1997 we put out 2 albums, Song and Dance Man and Simplified. Simplified came out on June 21st, 1997, and then on August 1st, 1997 we put out its companion piece, the Song and Dance Man album. One was a Saturday night album, and which would have been Song and Dance Man, and Simplify was the Sunday morning album. And then we hit the road. And we hit the road for all of 1997, all of 1998, all of 1999, and all of 2000. and we played everywhere twice. We toured like crazy. We went to Europe a couple times. We drove back and forth across Canada probably 20 times. Toured the U.S. another 10 or 15 times back and forth. We just toured like there was no tomorrow. Somewhere in the middle there, we found our way back in Edmonton in November of 1998 to record a little EP. I had a couple of songs that I'd sort of written that I wasn't really sure what to do with, but we decided we'd go and record them. And the song that the whole EP was sort of built upon was a song that I'd written in Wakefield, Quebec. It was a song called Steel Belted Radio. And it was a song, I remember the guys and I were talking that we needed new tires for our van. We had driven so many miles. And we were talking, I said, oh man, we got to get some new tires and for the van, and winter's coming and all this kind of stuff. And for some reason, may have been beer, I don't know, but instead of saying steel belted radials, I said steel belted radio. And I remember when I said it, just a little slip of the tongue, I thought, that is a good title. I'm going to try to write that song. And so I did. And that was the inspiration behind that. So we recorded 3 or 4 or 5 songs. I don't even remember anymore. Maybe LA was on that. Soundcheck song was on that, which was written while on tour in Holland back in December of 1997. We were never given a sound check, so we had to do sound check in front of the crowd. And the sound check song became the way we started shows for a long time. So anyway, the Steel Belted Radio EP was recorded in 98, but didn't see the light of day until, I think it was July, something like that, of 2000. June of 2000, I think it was. June or July, somewhere in there. We were touring. We were going back to Europe, and we thought it'd be fun to have a little EP that we could sell while we were over there, in between albums. In November of 2000, we finally got off the road after about 4 years and made our way into the studio to record the follow-up, the actual legit follow-up to to the legit follow-up to Song and Dance Man, and maybe even the legit follow-up to Northern Town, now that I think about it. But the legit follow-up to Song and Dance Man, an album called Fools for the Radio. And we recorded that in Bath, Ontario, at the Tragically Hip studio there, a place called the Bath House. And so we were there for about 6 weeks, recorded that album. That album came out on September 11th, 2001. So needless to say, that album took a back seat for a long time. And then, so that album came out in 2001. What was next? The next album would have been recorded in May of 2002. And that album became Table for One, which saw the light of day in April of 2003. Also released a live album around that time called Born So Long Ago. That was also in 2003. 2004, in the fall of 2003, I was in Calgary with my buddy Joel and Laurie Matheson, and we recorded an album called Rock and Roll Recordings, Volume 1. So this whole time we've just been sort of weaving along from Northern Town, going through all these little stops along the way, seeing what we can find, seeing what kind of trouble we can get in, and just keep moving forward. It's the best we could do. That album finally saw the light of day in October of 2004. Would have been the Rock and Roll Recordings Volume 1 album. And then from there, things ground to a halt. I wasn't sure what was going to happen anymore. We the band and I, the guys and I had stopped touring with Dave and Ernie and Mech. Derek had gone home by that point. He was tired of the road. Everybody was tired of the road. So I needed a break. But they decided to keep on keeping on. They continued on without me. They called themselves the Populars, which made me the unpopular. So 2004, the last rock and roll recordings came out, and things kind of ground to a halt. Wasn't sure if I was ever going to record again. Wasn't sure if I cared if I ever recorded again. But so that was 2004. Then the next record didn't see. There wasn't a new Plume record until July 2009. So almost 5 years later. How does that happen? That album was called 830 Newfoundland. From 830 Newfoundland, hit the road, toured like crazy again. I was back at it, baby, and quite happy to be on the road again. I just couldn't wait to get on the road again. So the guys and I toured, and it was fun. We had a fun time recording the album. All the guys were back in the fold. Derek, Dave, Ernie. Ben Wilson entered the picture. It was great. Tons of fun. We toured that album. That was in 2009. Then, things kind of slowed down again, So 2010 went by, 2011, 2012. Then in 2013, I wrote a little song called So Long Stompin' Tom. I wrote that right after he passed away. I talk about it in an earlier episode of Stories from a Lonesome Stretch of Highway. In fact, I think it was episode 1. So I wrote So Long Stompin' Tom. On the heels of that, like within 2 weeks of that, I went in the studio in Ottawa to a studio called 10 Volt. And we recorded Red and White Blues. Recorded and mixed it in a week. So that record came out in June of 2013. Then in December of 2013, recorded and released Back Home for Christmas. So once again, as you can tell, the path just keeps weaving along. You can't plan anything. I mean, what's that saying? If you ever want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So we just sort of keep moving along, and to quote the Tragically Hip, looking for a place to happen, making stops along the way. And that's what we did. We sort of kept plodding along. That was 2013, December 2013. And then from there, somehow, another 5 years goes by. Wow, another 5 years between albums. Somehow that happened. So 2013 was the Christmas album. 2018, June of 2018, we released the album Born by the Radio. To complete the trilogy of radio albums with Steel Belted Radio, Fools for the Radio, and Born by the Radio. I guess maybe I have a thing for the word radio, kind of like Van Morrison. Radio, turn it up. So that was in 2018. We recorded that here in Edmonton in the fall of 2017. Over the space of about 6 months, I would go in the studio for couple hours, a couple days a week, and noodle away at this album. Ernie and Ben had recorded their tracks for that album in the fall of 2017, and then over the next 6 months, Scott Franchuk at the helm and me in front of a microphone recorded the rest of the tracks for that album. It came out in June of 2018, and then somehow we hit the road again, and then lo and behold, last summer, we did a little reunion tour with Derek, Dave, and Ernie and I, and it was a ton of fun. And I kind of thought that was the end of the line. I thought it was very apropos, a good way to wind things up, a good way to, say see you around. I was really at that point. I just figured, maybe I've just done all I can do in this business. Time to move on. Maybe grow up. Hell, I'm 51 years old now. Might as well grow up. Maybe get a job, And thought that was it. And then in July, a month later, the idea, the thought, the premise, the crazy idea of doing a new album with the guys was laid out in front of me with the folks from Royalty Records. And they, so we spent, the better part of 3 or 4 months going back and forth on the phone. I had a bunch of songs. I always have a bunch of songs. Right now I probably have 80 songs that I'm working on. But I had a bunch of songs that I knew kind of worked well together. They just needed a little bit of sandpaper run over them to sort of, work down the rough edges. But I had a clutch of songs that I knew, if given a chance, could work. I also knew that I wanted everybody who was involved with me over the years. I wanted them involved in this record. Derek, Dave, Ernie, Ben Wilson, Ryan Barwin, Jeff McLeod, all these guys who have played and made such profound contributions to my albums over the years. I wanted them involved. And then I also knew that I wanted Merrick David to produce the album. I knew I wanted Merrick to produce it because he produced Song and Dance Man, and he also produced The Fools for the Radio, which were, two pretty good records, and largely because of Merrick. If you like those records at all, that's because of Merrick, because what he brought to the table on both of those albums, you can't put your finger on. But it was worth. It was so worth bringing him on board. I'm just so glad to have had him involved in those two records. So when I knew that this record was coming around, I knew I wanted him involved as well, because I really, I like what he brings to the table. I like what he pulls out of me in the studio. I think he really gets my best performances. So anyway, so that's how that kind of unfolded. So, and we went and recorded back at Riverdale Recorders with Scott Franchuk. And so it was like old home week. It was interesting because a friend of mine, Neil McDonald, who sang on the Song and Dance Man record, and then also sang on this new album, Lonesome Stretch of Highway. When he was he came down on a couple of different occasions while we were recording, and he said, "Man, it's like the most recording session I've ever been to." He said it was like just sort of hanging around with watch it like at a family reunion or a Thanksgiving dinner or something. He says it was just, there was no pressure, there was no stress. It was just a bunch of guys who've always enjoyed each other's company making a record. And man, I am so thrilled with the way this record came out. I really feel that these songs are the best songs I think that I've ever done. I know everybody says it. Oh, this record is the best record I've ever done. And I get that. You're supposed to say that. But I really do feel like this clutch of songs, they work together. One thing about them, for sure, is they are certainly the longest batch of songs I've ever had, as far as from the concept of the song, the initial germ to completion. Some of these songs were around for decades. But yeah, there's a lot. These songs fermented for a long time, and it was well worth the wait. They were worth it. Anyway, so this was a very long and rambling story about the long and rambling highway that I took out of that northern town to the album Lonesome Stretch of Highway. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your continued support over the years. I look forward to seeing you down the road. Thanks for everything. Take care. All right.